Good afternoon, Maryland Municipal leaders. It is my pleasure to welcome you to another of MML's Newsmaker Series Town Halls. I'm Scott Hancock. I'm MML's Executive Director and very happy to be your facilitator for today's webinar. We're very pleased and excited to welcome one of our very favorite guests returning to Newsmakers today, and that is Maryland Senior Senator, United States Senator Benjamin Cardin. By the way, a longtime friend of MML and certainly a very, very good friend of Maryland municipal governments throughout the years. Senator Cardin, as you would expect, is a very busy man, and he has been delayed for a few minutes this afternoon. But we are very fortunate to have one of his top-notch staff, Mike Thomas, on screen with us. And Mike is going to give us a little bit of a preview of what the senator is going to talk about when he is able to join us in a few minutes. So, Mike, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Welcome.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. My name is Mike Thomas. I handle Senator Cardin's appropriations work. I've also done a lot of state and local government work, so I'm very excited and happy to be here with you all today. A few of the things that the senator wanted to talk about with you is just looking at the state of the Senate that we have right now. It's a 50-50 Senate, but we've been able to do a lot for state and local governments. We're very excited about that. Just kind of wanted to go over some of those issues with you. Biggest one, kind of the one that has the direct most involvement for state and local governments, is going to be the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that we passed last November. It's a generational change in the amount of money that we have going to state and local governments for, priorities such as cybersecurity measures. There's wastewater, sewer water monies. There's money for roads, transportation, and bridges. These are generational changes that we're very excited about. The CHIPS and Science Act we passed just a few months ago over the summer. This is going to make us a little bit more competitive in terms of bringing resources to the state. I know President Biden is he's in New York today to make an announcement on the billions of dollars that companies are coming to bring this domestic production of semiconductors back to the United States. The other kind of large bill that we were just passed kind of in early August, it's the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. This is going to be transformational in terms of things we can do for healthcare that are going to affect your bottom line costs in terms of the money that you have to pay for your pensioners, and then also kind of lowering energy costs, which helps us all, especially with kind of these new buildings that we want to bring online. There is additional monies that we're trying to look at through some of these programs. I know that with the infrastructure investments that we want to provide, it's over a 5-year period of time. So we've gotten our first installation of some of this money for roads and bridges. We've got about $82 million. We'll get a total of $400 million over 5 years for this. There's about 270 bridges in Maryland that are in poor condition. We can start to kind of go through and make sure that it's easier for us to actually be able to take care of these programs. Okay, here's Senator Cardin.
Thank you so much for joining us. So good to see you, and glad you could be here for our Newsmaker series. So, for the man who truly needs no introduction to this audience, but we're going to do one anyway, Senator Ben Cardin was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2007. Prior to that, he served as a Maryland representative for the 3rd Congressional District in Congress from 1987 to 2007. Senator Cardin is a 3rd-generation Marylander, has been a national leader on health care, retirement security, the environment, and many fiscal issues. There's so much more that I could add about this wonderful senator, but let me just say that we in Maryland are indeed fortunate to have him as our senator. So, Senator Cardin, thank you again for making time to be with us today, and I turn the floor over to you.
Well, first is Scott Hancock. What an incredible career you've had at the Maryland Municipal League. Congratulations on a job just very well done. I need to underscore that because, there have been times that our municipalities have been handled like stepchildren. They really have not been at the table when major decisions have been made. I really think under your leadership, Scott, that has changed. You still don't have the equal status you should have, but you've been able to be at the table and been able to get results on behalf of municipal governments. And congratulations to you on that. And I'll cite a couple specific examples of which we've been able to do nationally, but it was clearly the municipal leadership through your organizations that were able to accomplish these goals. So thank you for your public service. You truly are the front line of the front lines. The municipalities are the front line. I frequently say that when the federal government has a problem it can't solve, it pushes it off on the states. When the states have a problem they can't solve, they push it on to the counties. When the counties have a problem they can't solve, they push it on to municipalities. When the municipalities have a problem they can't solve, they push it off to their executive director. So you're the one who's truly the front line on all these issues. So congratulations on a job just very, very well done.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it.
And then I just really want to make an observation. The 107th Congress, I've been in this business for a while. To me, I cannot remember a more productive Congress than we've had in the 117th. And we're not finished yet, although we have adjourned for the midterms. We'll have a lame duck session in November and December. But what we've been able to accomplish so far is pretty remarkable. Many of these accomplishments, bipartisan, some partisan. I always like to get bipartisan results because they're more stable. They have a better chance of standing the test of time. So, but we were able to get a lot of things done. And I want to acknowledge my staff person, Michael Thomas, who's on the line. I know you've already introduced him to the audience, but Michael's been my bricks and mortar local government person who's tried to keep you all engaged on every one of these bills as to how you can access the partnership with the federal government. But it started with the American Rescue Plan, in which, yes, it dealt with COVID-19. It dealt with a lot of with families trying to get them out of poverty. But what was unique about this bill is that we provided direct COVID relief to our municipalities. And in Maryland, it was over $1 billion that went directly to municipalities. I want to tell you something. We didn't have the support of the states or the counties in making that money directly available to the municipalities. You all lobbied successfully to get the funds going directly to local governments. So congratulations on that. And as a result, during the COVID pandemic, you were able to keep your head above water. You were able to do services that otherwise would not have been able to get done. So I'm very proud of the role we were able to play during the American Rescue Plan legislation. That was followed up by the infrastructure bill. And you want to know how important that was. That's a once in a generation bipartisan bill to deal not just with roads and bridges and transit systems, but also our port facilities, airport facilities, our water infrastructure, Chesapeake Bay, broadband. But there was a part of that, and let me just talk broadly for one moment. I just came from a ceremony at Fort McHenry in regards to the first construction contract for Mid-Bay, which will have an incredible impact on our state. That's going to be the next environmental restoration after Poplar Island. And you talk to the local governments and municipal governments on the Eastern Shore, they're extremely excited about what we're doing on environmental restoration. Normally, we have local governments upset about being the site of dredge material. Now we have them fighting for beneficial use of dredge material. So this is a result of the infrastructure bill. We were able to get money to advance port projects. And this is a win-win situation for our environment and for keeping the economic activities in regards to our ports. While I'm talking about this, let me just assure you, one of my highest priorities, I chair the infrastructure subcommittee, is to get a Water Resources Development Act that accelerates and funds local harbors. We have a lot of local harbors in Maryland that need dredging, that today there's just not enough resources being devoted towards that. We're working very hard to get more of Maryland's small harbors dredged by the Army Corps of Engineers. But also in that infrastructure bill, we did things for local governments. We significantly increased a program that I'm responsible for, the Transportation Alternative Programs. These are monies controlled by local governments, where you can put in pedestrian paths or bicycle paths or improvements to livability of communities. We also have money to reconnect communities that were divided by highway projects that hurt communities. We also are committed to removing all lead in pipes. That is, again, our municipal governments have challenges with lead poisoning. And we also were able to get additional funds to deal with a lot of the other social issues related to climate change. So there is a social component to what we were able to do that helps municipal governments. Then we passed the Safer Communities Act that provided for the first time some sensible gun safety legislation, and it provides money for mental health services in our schools. Then we passed the PACT Act to help our veterans with toxic diseases. And then we passed the Chips and Science Bill that gets the advanced manufacturing to remain here in the United States and invest in research. And then most recently, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act that will help Marylanders deal with the cost of healthcare for the first time, taking on the pharmaceutical industry, so the United States is no longer an outlier on the cost of prescription medicines, so we can negotiate price, putting a cap at $35 a month on insulin, extending the ACA caps that will help Maryland families that are eligible for the subsidies by $2,200 a year, put a cap on out-of-pocket costs for Medicare beneficiaries for prescription drugs, helped energy costs in this country, and invested in climate change. So we have a long record of things that have been done that will help municipal governments as you look at all the different tools that are available, help our economy, but just as importantly, help partner with our municipal governments. And then, as I'm sure some of you are aware, because you've been in touch with Mike Thomas, the appropriations process was different last year and this year with congressional directed funding. And we've had lots of requests from municipal governments for help. And we're looking at every one of those. We have a handbook that's out that can help you in dealing with directly with earmark requests. But we recognize you as our valuable partner as part of Team Maryland. And we want to make sure that everything we do is in partnership with our local governments. It is Team Maryland. I work very closely with Senator Van Hollen. The two of us, we're together today. We confer almost daily. He serves on the Appropriations Committee. I serve on the Finance Committee. We share the burdens in the state and try to make sure we address all the priorities. And I work with all 8 members of our congressional delegation. They all have municipal governments, and we work together to try to help as Team Maryland, working with the governor and working with our counties and working with our municipal leaders. And with that, Scott, I know this is a conversation. I know we're going to have questions. I want to leave maximum time for you to be able to get your questions asked. I warn you, though, because sometimes people are timid in asking questions. If they don't, I just go back to one of my standard speeches, and I have lots of them I can give.
I don't think you have to worry about the municipal leaders being timid, Senator. They always jump out. We already have several questions. I want to remind everyone, if they have questions, the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen is where you pose those questions or comments. We would welcome you to do that now. But Senator, since you have already talked about all of the ways that municipal governments have received direct financial support during the worst of the pandemic, and even more recently with the infrastructure bill and cybersecurity legislation. And before I forget it, thank you so much for your strong support of these initiatives. We know you are on the front lines on everything that's had direct influence and money coming to municipal governments. We appreciate it. But here's the question. We know it's still early, but based on what information that has made its way back to the halls of Congress at this point, what's the perception of your fellow senators and maybe even folks across the hall on the success of these programs as of today?
That's a great question. Well, as I pointed out, many of these programs are bipartisan programs. So I think you'll find a similar message in regards to how effective the infrastructure bill is, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to invest in roads and bridges and transit systems, airports, ports. So I think, and the money has been coming out. I was with Mitch Landrieu, who is the administration's point person on the infrastructure bill, and he said there's already a couple $100 billion that have already been actually put out to the community. So in Maryland, we can talk about Mid-Bay starting to do construction, or I can talk about some bridges that have already gotten some help under this program, or We can talk about other major transportation, some transit money that's already gotten out to Maryland. So we can talk about specific projects that have been moved forward as a result. That's duplicated in every state in this country. So I think there's been general strong acknowledgement of a once-in-a-generation opportunity with the infrastructure bill. I think you'll see a similar result on the CHIPS and Science bill. Again, that was bipartisan. The president announced today $10 billion investment in New York on a microchip program there. There was previously announced, I think, I forgot the exact amount, $40 billion investment. We're bringing the manufacturing of our semiconductors back here to the United States. And I was with Administrator Doyle, he's the administrator of the Maryland Port Administration, saying that there's a couple thousand chips in every car, and the Port of Baltimore is the leading importer-exporter of vehicles in the country. So those chips being manufactured here is going to help us in having product, autos, to help our local economy. So the CHIPS bill is a very important bill for U.S. manufacturing in the future, but it's also a security issue. We get most of our chips today from Taiwan, and the future of Taiwan is not exactly clear today. So we have to have our own supply chain here in the United States, and this bill will help us deal with it. And then the second part of that, which is science, we are the center for science research in America with NIH and FDA and NIST. So we're going to be getting a lot of help to our mission here in our state, which will bring in a lot of jobs and a lot of private sector employment feed off of those research opportunities that we have in Maryland. So I think you're going to find general bipartisan praise for much of the legislations, much of the bills that we've been able to enact. That's also true, by the way, with the Safer Communities, which was a bipartisan bill, including gun safety legislation and mental health services, particularly for our children. Which brings me to the two bills that were partisan: the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act. But the support for that amendment running the nation is nowhere, it's bipartisan. Americans like the idea that we supported our schools during the pandemic. They like the ideas that state and local government can continue to provide services in public safety and in sanitation, in all the services that are provided by local government that could continue during the pandemic, thanks to the American Rescue Plan. So I think the results speak for themselves. And quite frankly, we saw what happened with the hurricane in Florida. Climate change is with us. We need to have resiliency. We need to adapt. We need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And the Inflation Reduction Act is the largest single investment ever to deal with the realities of climate change from the point of reducing carbon emissions as well as resiliency and adaptation. So I think the results will be very favorably received.
Thank you, Senator. We do have a question regarding any update on the status of the relocation potentially of the FBI headquarters to Greenbelt.
Yes, there is some news there. Our delegation has been meeting regularly on that. We think any fair evaluation that Prince George's County would be the location of the FBI consolidated facilities. But by way of background, we were very close to having an announcement about 7 years ago, about 7 years ago, when President Trump was elected. He decided to cancel the contract. We think it had a lot to do with his facilities located on Pennsylvania Avenue across from the FBI location. In fact, that's not just my assessment. That was the Inspector General had some assessment of that happening. So we were knocked off rails on this project moving forward. We're back on rails. However, the information we recently got from the General Services Administration, we are somewhat puzzled by the standards that they're using. And we're in the process of trying to understand their rationale for some of the evaluation standards. This is different than it was 5 years ago. So we still feel we have the best opportunities, but we're out there aggressively looking at how the evaluation process is moving forward.
Thank you, Senator. I think Greenbelt is very interested in keeping close tabs on what might be happening there. Question on preemption. This is a threat that those of us in municipal government deal with regularly in the context of state government actions. We're curious, how does the narrative of local authority play into discussions with the members of Congress? Are you aware of anything impactful being discussed at the federal level that would take away aspects of local authority?
Scott, I really appreciate this question because I wish there was more consistency by elected officials on their view on federalism. I view federalism not just as federal state, but federal local. And I respect the fact that the government that's closest to the people is the one that's going to be held to a greater degree of accountability because of accessibility of the public to decision makers. So I do believe that the framers of our Constitution understood this when they created federalism in the Constitution, making it clear that states had certain authorities that the federal government could not preempt. So when I first got to the House of Representatives, there were lots of debates about who should regulate insurance. And because of the philosophy of that issue, it seemed like more Democrats were saying the federal government should preempt and Republicans were saying they shouldn't. And I had served 20 years in the state legislature. I believed in federalism. And I supported the state's rights to regulate insurance. I thought that was the right thing to do. So I try to be consistent throughout my career, but I don't have many friends on this issue on either side of the aisle. It seems like it's the issue involved. Let me just give you one very controversial recent example. We know the Supreme Court reversed Roe v. Wade. And I heard my Republican colleagues, and I'll be a little bit partisan about this, but I could have used an example on the Democratic side on a different issue. Say, well, it's states' issues. Let the states decide where abortion should be legal or not legal. It's a state issue. That's what the Supreme Court held in the Dobbs case. But within a few weeks, Republicans have now say, let's pass a national law preempting the state. So what Maryland has allowed would be preempted by federal government. Now, I would like to have some consistency on philosophy here from my colleagues, but it seems to me the issue controls the debate rather than the respect for local government controlling the debate. And I find that regrettable. And I said I could give you an example on the Democratic side that's as egregious as the abortion issue on the Republican side. So look, I think there are times we have to have national consistencies. I recognize that. I think, to me, on environmental regulations, you need to have national consistency. Clean air, air doesn't know state borders. Water don't know state borders. We need to have national rules controlling clean water and clean air. But there are a lot of issues that should be respected at the local level.
Thank you for those comments, Senator. Question from College Park. Much of the investment of the infrastructure bill is still going to state DOTs as formula funds, and as the Georgetown Climate Center has noted, our ability to address the transportation-related causes of climate change depends largely on how those states use these funds. But unfortunately in Maryland, our state DOT is still working to expand highways, such as I-270 and I-495. How can we, as municipal officials, monitor state use of these federal dollars and help make sure that our state DOT is working to build smarter and better infrastructure that will, in fact, decrease greenhouse gas emissions?
This is a very important question. Thank you for the question. I chair the infrastructure subcommittee on the Environment and Public Works Committee. We were the committee that designed most of the transportation sections that were in the bipartisan infrastructure package. And this was a carefully negotiated decision. Believe me, there is a lot of interest to give as much power as possible to the states in regards to transportation. I, as I mentioned earlier, am the author of the Transportation Alternative Programs. It was bipartisan. My Republican colleague at the time was Senator Cochran from Mississippi, and we created the Transportation Alternative Programs to give the local governments, the counties and municipalities, more say about how transportation money are spent in their community. It still has a state part to it, but it's to be used to help deal with municipal and county problems. And we think that has worked well. I've talked recently with the head of the Federal Highway Administration as to how we can get even more local input into decision-making in regards to the transportation alternative programs. I say that because that's 10% of the full pie that goes to the state. So in that regard, that 10% is really directed towards local needs. So we want to make sure you have direct input. The 90% that's under traditional formula funding, that goes, as you know, through the states that have their annual travel show among the counties, and you get the input. How do you influence this is through your state legislative delegations that are going to have the most to say on behalf of local government, or your county execs, or your mayors in making your pitch as the state goes through and makes its decisions. We've also added language in the infrastructure bill as to the missions that the states are expected to achieve, including resiliency and dealing with the realities of climate. So that's in the standards to be used, but I would be the first to acknowledge in regards to formula funding, at least 90% of the formula funding, it is the decisions are going to be made at the state level. But there is now non-formula monies that have also been dramatically increased. These are competitive national funds, and many of those are directed exactly towards resiliency and carbon reductions and efficiencies. So yes, we have monies that are going out to set up electric vehicle charging stations. We have money that's going in to research for alternative fuels that are being used for transportation. We have money that are going out in regards to resiliency for communities. So there are direct funding sources that are aimed at those objectives that we put into the legislation. So there are opportunities under the infrastructure bill.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I would add that I think some of the issues that we, as particularly the smaller municipalities, have is, yes, there are direct funding opportunities, grants, et cetera, but I think in many cases our members feel a little uncomfortable trying to compete for some of those grant funds because they're so small, and they need help. And I know we get telephone calls all the time from and emails from folks saying, I really don't, I'd like to have access to this money, but I don't know how to write the grant application. And we do refer them to the state, and in some cases, our small staff here is able to help. But you know, it's some of those federal applications for grant funding are very, very ominous and intimidating.
Well, we'll try to help where we can, but I think you're correct. If you are a municipal leader, you want to get the state on your side if you can. It helps you. There's no question about it. Yeah. First of all, there's some programs that have to have the state approval in order to be able to get funding. So you want to get the state on your side, but there's other ways of getting around that. So we will certainly work with you on
that. Thank you, Senator. I want to turn to one of your bills, the Seafood Marketing Act. I guess our members would be curious as to, because seafood industry is so important to municipal governments in Maryland, how your legislation is going to benefit Maryland's municipalities, particularly those in watershed areas.
Well, let me talk about seafood for one moment, because there's several initiatives that we're moving ahead. I got a phone call on Tuesday from Secretary Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, telling me that the Biden administration is going to give maximum number of H-2B visas starting October 1st of this year. So for the seafood industry in Maryland, those H-2Bs are like, they're like gold. They're very, very valuable, and we need as many as we possibly can get. We are still working, Senator Van Hollen and I are working with our House counterparts to increase the number of H-2Bs generally, or to divide out the seafood industry and have a separate allocation for the seafood industry in regards to H-2Bs, so they don't count against the other allocations. So we are working in regards to the seasonal workers because we know how important that is, particularly for the shellfish industry on the eastern shore of Maryland. We also are working in regards to our catfish population, which is a serious challenge for us management under the current federal regulations that have it under a different agency than generally regulates seafood. We're working in regards to making sure that the Maryland catfish, which is different than the catfish that are down south, are treated similarly to other types of similar species that will benefit Maryland's seafood industry. So we're also working in regards to that. We're working, I had a meeting this week, last week with the USTR, United States Trade Representative. Seafood came up in those discussions as to some of the trade agreements that we're negotiating that can affect the Maryland seafood industry. So we are working very closely in regards to those issues. And then to promote seafood, the legislation would allow us to have a more common way of promoting Maryland seafood and U.S. seafood.
Thanks, Senator. I want to remind everyone that if you have a question for Senator Cardin, you can go on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen and type in a question or comment, and we will be happy to share that with the senator. They've sort of made a liar out of me, Senator, when I said our folks would never, ever be timid about asking you a question, because we have exhausted all of the questions we have right now. But we're going to give folks just a little bit more time, maybe to come forward with other questions. In the meantime, other comments, thoughts that you would like to share with our membership?
Well, let me just fill you in to the current schedule so you're aware. Obviously the midterm elections are coming up in 5 weeks. We went into early recess because of the midterm elections, and quite frankly, we got as much of our work done as we possibly could. The major unfinished business for this Congress is the appropriation bills themselves. We've had committee actions on the Appropriations Committee. We haven't had an agreement on the overall size of the federal budget, and that's being negotiated. And I've been told that that is pretty well resolved, but that the politics of the midterm elections make it difficult for us to implement that until after the election itself. We don't want to get involved into the midterm politics. So we expect that by December 15th, that's the date when the continuing resolution was passed to, we'll be able to pass the full year appropriations. Now that's important for Maryland for a lot of different reasons. So we have a lot of issues that are in the full appropriations bills that are critically important to our state. A lot of federal agencies depend upon a predictable year-long funding flow. Some of them are getting major bump ups of funds in order to deal with mission changes. And we hope to have that done by December 15th. The other bill that is not yet completed is the National Defense Authorization Act. We expect that to be on the floor. Actually, it's going to be put on the floor, as I understand it, next Tuesday, not for action, but just for transparency. So we'll have a copy of it on the floor next Tuesday, and we expect to take that up as one of the first items after the election in the lame duck session. It not only authorizes the Defense Department for the next year, obviously we need to know the level of funding for that, and then also it includes other related issues that have no other way of finding a way of getting passed. So it'll have another 100 or so issues that'll be connected to it. We have a lot that we're trying to get included in the National Defense Authorization Act. And then lastly, we usually do in the omnibus end of the year bill, some tax extenders, some healthcare issues, et cetera. So we still have some business to do, and we are now negotiating those terms. Obviously, the midterm results will have an impact on this. If there is no change in Congress control, then obviously the politics that you've seen over the last 10 months, under the last 21 months would continue again. If, on the other hand, either one or both chambers change party affiliation, it may make it more challenging for us to continue, because that body may try to hold up legislation until they have the control in the next Congress. So it's hard to make predictions of what's going to happen in a lame duck session of Congress. As you know, in Maryland, all 8 of our congressional seats are up for election, and the seat currently held by Senator Van Hollen is up. My term does not expire for another 2 years, so I'm not on the ballot this fall.
We're glad you're around for 2 years and hopefully 6 more after that, Senator. Greenbelt wanted to make sure that you knew that. Said, please, I got to read this. Please let the senator know that the city of Greenbelt and neighboring municipalities remain opposed to the maglev.
What
they
took them
don't
so
want
long
to
to
let
ask
you
that?
think that they've forgotten.
What took them so long to put a question in on this issue? Look, this is the 6th question, if I'm correct. So I take it it's not their priority like it used to be.
Oh. There will definitely be a
funny.
response.
Every place I go, it's not necessarily in Greenbelt. Any place I go, I know I'm going to hear from Greenbelt in regards to the maglev issue. I'm not aware of anything occurring in this Congress in regards to maglev. You never know. So, but I have not seen any specific issue that has been presented to Congress as it relates to maglev. As you know, there's a lot of local politics involved in this. There are very strong opposition, very strong proponents. The costs are the costs, and the environmental issues are the environmental issues. And it's my understanding the state's trying to sort itself through those issues.
You can't say that we're not tenacious, Senator.
Oh, I respect greatly, and I believe me, I hear from not just Greenbelt, the local officials. I hear from your friends in Annapolis. They talk to us frequently about it, and we appreciate the input that we've been able to get from your offices. Believe me, I don't want to be sarcastic about it. It's an issue that is of great concern. At this point, we still think it's mainly in the state's hands rather than the federal government's hands. The state has to decide whether it wants to move forward on this project or not.
Thank you, sir. Question regarding infrastructure plan to work with U.S.-based companies or a policy on prefab manufacturing. This question is from someone who actually has a client in Laurel, Southland Industries, with a prefab manufacturing plan.
Well, I don't think we're going to get involved in the specifics of manufacturing, or whether you're talking prefabs for infrastructure, or you're talking prefabs and manufacturing. What we are getting involved in is high-tech manufacturing. We do believe that the future is in the high-tech fields. We believe we've added manufacturing jobs in the United States. We want to continue to add manufacturing jobs. We think America can be competitive, particularly in the high-tech fields. So when you say prefabs, to me, is one of those areas in which we can provide a much more efficient base for being able to maintain manufacturing industries here in the United States.
Seems like we have run out of formal questions. We do want to thank you so very much for your friendship and for being there for Maryland municipal government throughout all these many years, even dating back when you were not representing any municipalities in the Maryland House of Delegates. It is, well, you were speaker, so I guess you had them all.
I had them all, and then when I was in the House, I also represented one of your smaller municipalities, Baltimore City. So
yes, you did.
So I had Baltimore City, but
we really appreciate it.
But you're right, I do represent all the municipalities, and I've been treated so well as I've traveled throughout Maryland, and they're gems. They're just, I love Main Street America, and we have so many Main Street Americas in our municipalities, and it's wonderful. I chair the Small Business Committee, and I see these small businesses in our municipalities, and to me, they're the lifeblood of our economy. So we want to make sure they have a great future.
It's really heartwarming to hear that, Senator, because as you said when you first began, there seems to be maybe a lack of respect for what municipal governments do. And having worked in municipal government for all of these years, in one way or another, I have the utmost respect for what municipal officials do because I get tired of hearing where the rubber meets the road cliche. But it is. You can't get away when you're in municipal government, whether you're an appointed official or an elected official. So I really appreciate hearing you say that, and I appreciate everything you do to elevate the credibility and the stature of municipal government. They're really good folks in this arena. Really good folks. I did have one last question, Senator, if you've got a second.
Sure.
Thoughts about inflation. Gasoline prices went up, and then the prices started to come back down. Prices seem to have gone up overnight, particularly in our metropolitan areas. Any thoughts about where we're heading, the economy, et cetera?
Sure. Inflation is a very cruel tool, very cruel to our families. It robs them of their standard of living. And we have a global problem. It's not an American problem, it's a global problem. It has been building for a while. During COVID-19, we saw the supply chain challenges, and that produced some of the concern. Actually, even getting product was difficult for a lot of, we saw shelves half empty, which drives up price. Then the war in Ukraine caused war-type challenges, particularly on energy costs. And we saw not just gasoline prices going up, but all energy-related products going up pretty dramatically. So we have an inflation problem. To try to solve that, one of the tools is to increase interest rates. Increasing interest rates is a double-edged sword. It might help us with inflation, but it hurts the family budget. So we have real challenges with the family budget. And believe me, the United States is not alone in this. In fact, we're in better shape than most of the other industrial nations, but it is a serious challenge. That's why the Inflation Reduction Act that dealt with healthcare costs and energy costs was really to try to deal with the impact of inflation, at the same time reducing the supply of money by taking a couple $100 billion out of the U.S. economy. It's had some impact, obviously, but certainly inflation is still with us. So the announcement yesterday by the OPEC nations to cut back on production, we think was a gift to Vladimir Putin and the Russians, and it certainly hits us hard as far as our economic news is concerned. And I think we saw the results of that today as the recovery we saw in the stock market took a dip. So it's going to be up and down. At the end of the day, we have a very resilient economy. I'm very confident that we'll rebound as we need to. We're taking steps for supply chain. The CHIPS bill was a huge step in that direction so that we can have adequate supplies here in the United States. America currently is pretty much energy independent. We're taking additional steps to try to make sure that we have adequate energy resources here in the United States, and sharing some of our resources, particularly LNG, liquefied natural gas, with our global partners so that they're not as reliant upon gas from autocratic countries such as Russia. So we are trying to take steps to control some of these issues, but make no mistake about it, there's pain out there as a result of inflation. And we recognize that, and we're trying to take steps to help. But there is no easy fix for this issue. I want to just respond to the point you said about municipal leaders. I think you all are heroes. I really mean that. You're in pure public service. You really are put yourself out in front. You know that if somebody hits a pothole or is unhappy about a tree being someplace or whatever, a stop sign not to their liking, that you're going to hear from them. And you'll probably hear from them that moment because they have your number, or they'll knock on your door. They know where to find you. So you all are really really, truly frontline public servants. So I have a great deal of respect for what you do. I want to make sure you have the tools necessary to be able to respond to the needs. So I look at you as an extremely important part of Team Maryland, and I've always thanked the municipal leaders for their conversations with me, the way that they have shared information with our staff, so that I can try to do what I can to help you.
And Senator, we really appreciate the partnership that we have with you and your office, your wonderful staff. It's nice to hear the word partnership being shared more and more these days, because we aren't in a vacuum. The federal government, state government, county government, municipal government, we're all partners in providing good government for the citizens of Maryland. And you have certainly been a champion all the way along, and it's been a pleasure for me personally to work with you all of these years. And we really appreciate, again, as I said earlier, your friendship.
Scott, I wish you only the best going forward. You're a good friend, and you've done an incredible service to our municipal residents. So thank you very much for everything you've done.
Thank you, Senator Ben Cardin, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us for this Newsmaker Town Hall. We hope you have a wonderful remainder of your day, a nice weekend. Thank you again for joining us, and this will conclude our town hall today.